Okay, so today we are starting the actual story of the house on Mango Street. I did the introduction yesterday. So the first chapter, and I'm going to just take you through about 3 of these, is the house on Mango Street. And it's giving us some background about where our main character has been living. She starts off by saying we didn't always live on Mango Street. Before that, they lived on Loomis, on the 3rd floor, and then on Keeler, and then on Paulina. Sandra Cisneros does talk about these streets in her introduction. These are real places in Chicago. However, Mango Street is not a real place in Chicago. There is no Mango Street. But this is a fictional place where she lived that is going to be similar to a lot of the places that she actually lived when she was growing up. She recalls here that they used to always have to move, that they were renting all the time. And so every time there was a problem at their current apartment, they had to move. We get some basic information here. This is important. Remember, I mentioned yesterday that there are lots of characters in this story and they tend to pop in and out and you don't always remember who they are. So we have Mama and Papa, Carlos, Kiki, my sister Nenny, and me. And even though she hasn't introduced her name yet, I'm just going to tell you our narrator's name is Esperanza. So I am going to recommend that you do this. I have here in the beginning of the book a place where I'm just going to be writing down who these characters are. So we have Esperanza as the narrator, her 2 older brothers, Carlos and Kiki, her sister Nenny, and her mama and her papa. So 6 people in her family. So they have their own house finally on Mango Street. They don't have to pay rent to anybody, but it's not the house that she thought they would get. There's some interesting details here about just what it's like to live in a rental place when you don't have a lot of money. Like you have to be careful not to make too much noise. You have to make sure that the landlord isn't banging the ceiling with a broom and things like that. She has some details here that are very revealing about what it's like to live in an apartment building, especially like a low rent apartment building. She goes on to say here that they had to leave the last place they were living very quickly because the water pipes broke and the landlord wouldn't fix them because the house was too old. She describes that they had to use the washroom next door and carry water over in empty milk gallons. That's why Mama and Papa look for a house. And that's why we moved into the house on Mango Street, far away on the other side of town. So bad memories from the last apartment they were living in. She talks here about the dreams that her family has always had about having their own home. And this is what her parents would talk about, that, someday they would have their own house that wouldn't, that they wouldn't have to move every year and that they wouldn't have to tell everybody when they were going to take a bath because there would be more than one bathroom. This was the house that Papa talked about when he held a lottery ticket, and this was the house Mama dreamed up in the stories she told us before we went to bed. So they were always poor, they were always living in really difficult situations, but they had dreams that they would have a home of their own and that it would be a nice home of their own. But the house on Mango Street is not the way they told it at all. It's small and red with tight steps in front and windows so small you'd think they were holding their breath. So I'm underlining here details that could be on quizzes, but I'm also underlining examples of just literary devices. A lot of teachers will use this story to teach you literary devices that you will then be tested on, usually in your final exams. So personification is one of those. And when you describe windows so small, it's like they're holding their breath. That's personification because people hold their breath. Windows don't hold their breath. It's a very vivid description. There's also no trees in the yard, but there are 4 little elms that the city planted by the curb. Everybody has to share a bedroom. That's how small this house is. So there are stairs in the house, but there's only one bedroom and they all sleep in there together. Once when we were living on Loomis, so this is a story back from when they lived in the previous apartment, a nun from my school passed by and saw me playing out front. The laundromat downstairs had been boarded up because it had been robbed 2 days before, and the owner had painted on the wood, "Yes, we're open," so as not to lose business. So this is telling us a little bit about their neighborhood. "Where do you live?" the nun asked. "There," I said, pointing up to the 3rd floor. "You live there?" Nice nun. So of course, as a child, she's very ashamed. There. I had to look up to where she pointed, the 3rd floor, the paint peeling, wooden bars Papa had nailed on the windows so we wouldn't fall out. "You live there?" I nodded. I knew then I had to have a house, a real house, one I could point up to, but this isn't it. The house on Mango Street isn't it. For the time being, Mama says temporary. Papa says that too, but I know how those things go. So right away, we definitely can see that they're poor, they're insecure financially in terms of being able to stay someplace for any length of time. So they're very vulnerable as a family of 6. And Esperanza, as a child, obviously perceives that. The next little vignette is called Hairs. Lots of additional literary devices in here. Simile, personification. This is all about hair. Her papa's hair is like a broom, simile. Her hair is lazy, personification. It never obeys barrettes or bands. Carlos's hair is thick and straight. He doesn't need to comb it. Nenny's hair is slippery. Kiki, who is the youngest, has hair like fur, another simile. But her mother's hair is like little candy circles, all curly and pretty because she pins it up in a pin curl. It is the warm smell of bread before you bake it. The smell when she makes room for you on her side of the bed, still warm with her skin, and you sleep near her. The rain outside falling and Papa snoring, the snoring, the rain, and Mama's hair that smells like bread. So this little vignette is in direct contrast to the one we just read, because instead of showing insecurity, vulnerability, just the struggles of being poor, this shows that her family is a loving family and that she is especially comfortable with her mother and that her parents are good to her. I mean, just when I read this description, it does seem like she has a very loving home and that she feels safe with her family. Boys and girls. This is comparing she and her sister to her brothers. I mean, these are things, I think if you remember from my introduction to the book, I do have a lot of male students who struggle to read this, but I think all male students can relate to their relationships with their parents. They can definitely relate to the relationships they have with their brothers and sisters, how they act at home versus how they act in public. And Esperanza is noticing here that her brothers have plenty to say to Nenny and her when they're home, but when they're out in public, they can't be seen talking to girls. They are each other's best friend, not ours. So the boys stick together. They're obviously older, so they're more aware of social pressures and their reputation. And then for Esperanza, Nenny is too young, really, to be like a friend. So she's just my sister, and that was not my fault. You don't pick your sisters, you just get them, and sometimes they come like Nenny, which is sort of funny. Nenny can't play with those Vargas kids, or she'll turn out just like them. So these are kids in their community who we haven't met yet, but we're getting a hint that they're kids who are bad. And since she comes right after me, she is my responsibility. So this tells us something about Esperanza. She's the 3rd child, but she feels like she needs to take care of her sister. Someday I will have a best friend all my own. So this tells us that she's lonely. Until then, I am a red balloon, a balloon tied to an anchor, which is a metaphor. So a lot of times teachers, when they give tests on this book, they will use quotes from the book and ask you to identify what kind of literary device is being used in this case. Here's an example of a metaphor. So what we take from this metaphor, and the reason why similes, metaphors, personification, all those sorts of styles of writing are helpful, is that it helps us really feel more deeply what the character feels. So we can tell that Esperanza feels very held back in life, that she has a lot of energy and a lot of passion and doesn't really feel like she has a place to put it. The next chapter is my name. So here's where we actually are introduced to our narrator, which is Esperanza. She says that in English, her name means hope. In Spanish, it means too many letters. It means sadness. It means waiting. It is like the number 9, a muddy color. I think this is such an interesting description. I've never thought about a number as not a good one. It's interesting to think that like 9 is a muddy number. It is the Mexican records my father plays on Sunday mornings, songs like sobbing. So we have a simile there. So in Spanish, Esperanza is a sad name. In English, even though it means hope, she doesn't seem to feel that. And of course, Spanish is her native language. So, you know, they're Mexican. They don't identify with English-speaking people, with Americans. So she probably doesn't care all that much what it means in English at this point. But the more important thing is that it was her great-grandmother's name, and that her great-grandmother was a horsewoman too. Not that they have a horse, but that they were born, both of them, in the Chinese year of the horse, which is supposed to be bad luck if you're born female. But I think this is a Chinese lie, because the Chinese, like the Mexicans, don't like their women strong. So this is very important. The Mexican culture does not like their women strong, and this is going to be a theme throughout this entire book. My great-grandmother, I would have liked to have known her, a wild horse of a woman, so wild she wouldn't marry until my great-grandfather threw a sack over her head and carried her off, which could be real or it could be an exaggeration. But regardless, you know, in those days, you were married because your father said so. Just like that, as if she were a fancy chandelier, simile. That's how he did it. So that's how they saw their daughters, as, you know, prizes for other men. And the story goes, she never forgave him. She looked out the window her whole life, the way so many women sit their sadness on an elbow, which is a beautiful, beautiful phrase. This is a motif. So a motif is a recurring image or element in a story that comes up again and again as a way to reinforce the theme. And so this idea of women looking out the window is definitely going to be something we are going to see again and again. And then Esperanza says, I wonder if she made the best with what she got, or if she was sorry that because she couldn't be all the things she wanted to be. Esperanza, here's where we finally see her name. I have inherited her name, but I don't want to inherit her place by the window. Okay, so we already now know that Esperanza as a child has goals. She sees the differences in the generations and the potential perhaps for her to have a different life as you know, generations move on, there are more opportunities, but she's also feeling the constriction that comes from her culture and how men see women. At school, they say my name funny as if the syllables were made out of tin and hurt the roof of your mouth. But in Spanish, my name is made out of a softer something like silver, not quite as thick as sister's name. So Nenny's full name is Magdalena, which according to Esperanza is uglier sounding, but Magdalena can become Nenny, which is better according to Esperanza. But I am always Esperanza. So what I noted here, and we have this not only here, but also over here, that there are differences between Spanish and American pronunciations, but also differences between Spanish and American perceptions of a name. You know, in Spanish, she feels like her name is sad, but it's also soft. In English, it's hopeful, but it's also sort of harsh on the ear. So this kind of, to me, tells me that she feels disconnected from both her cultures, that she's not entirely belonging in one place or another. These sort of interpretations of her name, Spanish versus American, are feeding into her identity. She wants to be something different. I would like to baptize myself under a new name, a name more like the real me, the one that nobody sees. So this is also important. Everyone can identify with this idea. Everyone knows when you're growing up, deep inside of you, there are parts that no one knows about except for you. Boy or girl, this is the truth. And you want to be true to that little self inside of you, not the one necessarily that is expected from others. And that's what she's dealing with here. Esperanza could be Lysandra or Maritza or Zizi. She likes these names better because they fit the persona that she sees for herself.